Hi, welcome back to Family Sociology. This chapter is on the middle years and not so empty nest. All right, the middle years of the family are a time of transition. The current trend towards smaller families means that some parents are finished with child rearing while still quite young. Other parents find that their children, their adult children, are staying home longer. Or if they do leave, they may return in a cycle that's called the revolving door. Now, since life expectancy is also increasing, most parents can look forward to many years of life without children in the home. However, they may have to care for their own aging parents. There are a number of questions that need to be considered. Like what factors influence families in this stage of life? What happens to a couple's relationship during this period with all this transition going on? What impact do poor employment possibilities for young people have on family relationships? With increases in life expectancy, what pressures can be placed on the middle-aged children of aging parents? What does all this mean for family and society? Well, many of our students will be in families at this stage of life. Maybe you are at a part of this developmental cycle within your own family of creation or family of procreation. And so these developmental cycles that you're experiencing. So you should be able to have some interesting and maybe personally meaningful discussions with them about this topic. So, the middle years is a time of change. Let's look at that. As a life stage, middle age is relatively new. The current trend towards smaller families means that parents are finished with child rearing earlier, and since life expectancy is also increasing, most adults can look forward to many years without children in the home. But there are a number of questions which are going to be considered. And we'll look at these. What factors influence families in this stage of life? So we'll look at some data. The current middle-age generation, or the baby boomers. In 2011, the 45 to 64-year-olds in age are at nearly 9.3 million in Canada. That's outnumbering those in that 35 to 44 age group at about 4.68 million. Now, when we look at the median age of Canadian population, it's 39.9. It's expected to rise to about 44 years old as baby boomers age. Baby boom cohort has a profound effect on Canadian society. Never before have so many been so close to retirement in the same period of time. So when we look at this whole transitional period, let's begin with adolescence. Middle family years are also a time of change for children. They physically mature, finish their education, move from their parents' home, and get a full-time job, find a romantic sexual partner, and perhaps have a child. Now, this period is often a time of bickering and disagreement over so many things. What chores need to get done, the use of the car, curfews. It's also a time of exploring the age-old question for adolescents: who am I? The role of peers can play an important role in adolescence. Now, this includes the risk-taking and peer pressure that might exist. Peers are also very helpful in positively guiding us through those years, particularly when we find others like ourselves. In adolescence, adolescents also have better outcomes when they come from families with emotionally close and involved parents, the authoritarian style. Parents in these families provide healthy role models and monitor teens' activities. With positive communication and a supportive relationship, compromises can be worked out. And if parents react badly or accusatory to a child's disclosure or a vicious cycle can be set. Young persons become more secretive and defiant. Parents are more suspicious and controlling. Next, we're going to pick up again with Erik Erikson in the psychosocial stages of development. Identified as an important stage is the establishment of one's identity, answering the question we posed earlier, who am I? We enter a time labeled identity crisis. This is around the 18 to 22 years of age, and not sorting things out during this time can lead to identity confusion. Erikson addressed 4 identity statuses, and we're just going to review them. You'll find them in the infographic. I think I put it in behind me there, but it's on page 195. Now, to be clear, this psychosocial development, our most major tasks of adolescence, need to move through towards adulthood. And a stronger sense of identity is what's really important. Now, James Marcia, he identified 4 identity statuses at this stage of prosocial development. The first was known as achievement. Having a strong sense of who you are and what you want, it's focused and committed. The second stage is known as moratorium. This is where you're getting focused, but you're not yet committed. A student that stays in school but keeps changing their major or program might be someone in the moratorium stage. The third stage, foreclosure, is being committed to an outcome but very little focus. Following a path to be a doctor because doctors run in your family, but you really don't want to be a doctor, is an example of that one. And then the last stage is 4, identity diffusion. Now, in this stage, there's very little to no focus or commitment. It's basically that student who drops out of school and has really not discovered what their interests are. Now, also during this adolescence period, you'll find there's a term for a parenting phenomenon called helicopter parents. Now, this relates to parents who are obsessively concerned about their children's safety and success. Now, there are concerns for this approach, especially as children get older and enter college and university, where the student is considered their own adult and we're not permitted to speak to parents. There is also some support for this approach, too, concerning, the financial support and the advice and the regular contact and communication may have some advantages for some students. In North America, there's no specific rite of passage to mark the starting of adulthood. Rather, there's a gradual shift from one status to another. It begins in adolescence. Researchers are now suggesting that there's a stage after adolescence which they call emerging adulthood. Now, emerging adulthood roughly spans the years that 18 to 25, or even a little bit later, and it's a period of relative freedom and time of many possibilities. Identified as a new developmental stage between adolescence and young adulthood, further education, finding a job or a career, paying off debts, establishing parent relationships, all could occur either at this point. Now, script laying, remember there's an element about scripts in life. Now, scripts laying out the course are no longer really standardized. Now, we'll come back to the element of scripts later. Now we're going to revisit again with Erikson and his psychosocial development stages again, and we're moving from the adolescence to the young adult, to that stage of about age 35, and then we're going to move into the middle adulthood. So since we've been staying in school longer and staying in our family homes longer, starting families later, therefore we all tend to make more time making our way towards adulthood. It seems that it's more stages, more steps, more time. There are 5 features that separate emerging adulthood from other stages. They include identity exploration. It's an age of some more instability, self-focused period, an age of feeling in between, and an age of possibility. Now, a lot of that information you'll find in your textbook if you want to explore it a little bit. But we can also look at what differences, if any, are there with other demographic groups in Canada. What about Indigenous and young immigrants? So let's touch base there. Indigenous use lower rates of educational achievement and unemployment earnings and higher unemployment rates in comparison with non-Indigenous youth, this is largely due to various forms of discrimination and that is both historic and current. Recent immigrants to Canada are better educated than previous cohorts. Discrimination can affect immigrants where unemployment rates can be 3 times higher than that of native-born population. However, opportunities, education towards a career can and do assist immigrants in finding their way. Now we'll touch base on what's known as the sort of new parent generation at this midlife period. The middle years have now joined child rearing as the longest stages in life. The middle life group is diverse. It includes first-time parents as well as great-great-grandparents. Some begin midlife at peak of careers, others are nearing retirement at this time. Now, these years of the family life cycle are transitional, as was stated earlier. This period often marks splitting of one family into 2 or more as children leave families of origin and form their own nuclear families of procreation. Now, it's in this stage that we introduce the term stressors, as there is much going on at this time. There's more time considering one's own health, the death of loved ones, and financial problems. Thus, midlife involves a time of evaluation, assessing oneself, taking stock. During midlife, individuals typically consider their lives, especially work and family lives. Have they been fulfilling? Midlife occurs when children are transitioning to independence and parents are nearing retirement. It's at this time of life that we can introduce another Erikson term, generativity. Now, the focus here under generativity is one's legacy. Erikson stated that the key issue in middle age is having children and passing on something of value to the younger generation. Generativity takes various forms. It might be mentoring a relative or a young person. Creation of artistic works become important, working to better the community through advocacy, volunteerism, commitment to family leisure time, and to transmit family history and values to children and grandchildren. Now, as men and women's social roles become more similar, women will experience roots to generativity more closely resembling that of men. In the past, most research focused on men's experience. Career and public life seen as the most important forms of generativity. It was assumed that women expressed generativity through less esteemed functions like having and raising children. You've probably heard this before, the term midlife crisis. Well, the midlife crisis involves extreme strain as a person reevaluates his or her life in the middle age of their life. It's in middle age we get some sense of how our career goals are going. Are they still achievable? What can be done to alter things in order to achieve them? Any changes needed? New goals? Consider some representations of early middle age are represented in different movies, from films like This Is 40 and Date Night. What representations of the elderly are represented in the movie of the film The Bucket List? These are just some light-hearted examples. It's also during this period of time in middle age that the spirit of work for many is achieved. Now, this is the profound feeling of well-being, and the work that we do contributes to others and our community. We're striving for a sort of perfection, transcendence. The spirit at work is something we strive for in many ways. We don't only focus on ourselves and our careers at this time, we also evaluate our close relationships. We're reflecting on our relationships with our children, parents, grandchildren, our partner, and siblings. Their strong social relationships are important during this time. Intimate partners and sexuality. Now, it's not something you might always think about, Maybe you do. But in middle years and getting older, the role of intimacy and sexuality. Couples stay together may have regenerated or renegotiated some aspects of their relationship. As they adjust to the childless household, couples often move towards greater androgyny, or a balance between masculine and feminine. Middle-aged parents with teens at home are more likely to be depressed than those with older children. Many couples report more satisfaction in their marriage in midlife. The sexual relationship of couples may change. For some, interest in sex increases. For some, interest drops off through maybe boredom. Or some accept that the stereotype of older people being asexual beings is okay with them. Aging and sexuality experienced differently by sex in North America. Men's sexual attractiveness is linked to success, often increases with age. Women's is linked often to youthful physical appearance, which, for all of us, our appearance changes and often will decline with age. The greater acceptance now of sexuality and less opposition to sex for unmarried people, well, the reality unsurprisingly, given that this generation has ushered in the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Men are more likely than women to try a variety of sex-related activities, where gay men are the most likely to be sexually active. Now, those with regular sexual partners are more satisfied sexually and generally more positive about life than non-partnered individuals. When adults over 50 look for new partners, they increasingly turn to the internet dating sites. The fastest growing group of clientele is this age group. Men want committed relationships. Women want companionship without the prospect of heavy caregiving. Both sexes stress their youthfulness, either in appearance or in activities. Now, the other part of the term at the beginning of this chapter is involving the not-so-empty nest, or the empty nest. So, what is that? Homemaker mothers are sometimes described as suffering the Emptiness Syndrome. It's basically related to somewhat of a depressive state and a sense of uselessness when the last child leaves home. In fact, the empty nest often brings couples increased happiness and marital satisfaction. Middle-aged people experience a sense of confidence and competence, particularly in their jobs. So we can touch then on this not-so-empty nest. If you want to check out the figure 7.3 in your textbook, I think I've got it behind me here as well. The transition to independent living is occurring later and taking longer. More young people in full-time post-secondary education than was the case in the 1970s. So finding and keeping a job that pays enough is harder because of a slow economic growth and a recession that began back in Canada, or at least in Canada back in about 2008. And it's been improving, but it's also been ebbing and flowing. Living with parents increasingly is acceptable, and as such, 2 new terms have been coined as a result. The first term is the Boomerang Kids. These are children who return home to their parents' home after moving out. And the revolving door, young people's repeated moving in and out of their parents' home. Between 1981 to 2011, the number of unattached adults aged 20 to 24 who continued to live with their parents increased in 1981 from 41.5%, in 2011, 59.5%. And among those ages 25 to 29, that increase went from 11.3 to 25.2. More men than women are likely to be living at home. Now, living with parents is increasingly acceptable, but does produce stresses. Practical issues arise, things like the adjustment of roles. Since old parent-child roles may not really apply and be appropriate, what are the new roles? privacy for parents and child, the use of the family car if that's an issue, the family rules and regulations, sharing of expenses, the use of the home for parties and other forms of socializing. Parents feel that their need to maintain control of their home still exists even though their adult child is living with them. And adult children have needs to control their own lives, so you can imagine that there's some adjustments to go through that period. And in some instances, midlife children return to their parents' home, usually as a result of employment loss, relationship breakup, or, both child and grandchildren may move in. Grandparents are faced with renewed childcare responsibilities to allow adult children to enter the workforce. Now that brings us to a topic in this area which starts to emerge, and that's caregiving. Caring for the elderly has always been a family responsibility. Our Canadian population is and has been growing older as the baby boom age moves along. And in greater numbers, just over 8 million Canadians have been caring for family members in 2012. This caring is predominantly given to parents, in-laws, children, and grandparents. Women, little more than men, provide the care, with women providing about 20 hours or more care per week. That's quite a bit if you're also working and looking after your own children. Caregiving can include household tasks, meal prep and cleaning, getting cared for, and or sending and getting people to appointments. As can be expected, the toll is taken many forms in caregivers. It could be stress, worry, anxiety associated with the extra load, financial stressors. Many in need of care prefer family supports rather than institutional supports, assuming that the family the family is a better option. And for caregiver, balancing all of the demands, one's own job, the family needs, as well as those in the individual in need of care, can be overwhelming at times. However, caregiving can be as rewarding as well. This leads to what is known as the sandwich generation. Now, the sandwich generation are middle-aged adults who experience the stress of continuing dependency of their own children and an increased disability of their parents. Therefore, the middle-aged group tends to be the meat of the sandwich between their children and their own parents. Parents are now older when they have children, and family size is decreasing. Thus, fewer helpers are available to look after family. Older children living at home longer. Fastest growing group in Canada is the elderly, and the limited community and social service supports. Thus, the burden of caring for the elderly parent tends to fall on women. In contrast to earlier generations, many of these women have jobs. Caring for both children and the elderly relatives can be stressful, especially for those with several children or those looking after more than one older person. Now, I mentioned about the social script earlier, and I said we would revisit it again. Here's where we're going to revisit it, and it's labeled as the social time clock. Now, in our society, many aspects of life are governed by age. At what age can you vote, drive, and drink legally? The distinction between these life periods have become more blurred. For example, when middle age or old age begins. Yet people are more likely to experience a crisis in life events that occur off time because there are still social scripts or the expected patterns of behavior that we're supposed to exhibit. We can talk about the revolving door and the Boomerang Kids, and yet the script says you should be out of home, launched, in post-secondary, get a job, create a family, and so on. And yet that script may not be accurate anymore. Well, there's the middle years and the not-so-empty nest. I hope that's been helpful for you. Good luck and carry on the good work. Bye now.